I'm going to show you how to add character to your kick drums without introducing any phase issues. Here's a basic kick that I made in another video. And here is it processed. I've done this by processing the transient, body, and tail independently. In this video, we're going to build this sound from scratch, and I'll explain what I'm doing and why I'm doing it as we go. But first, I'm going to show you how not to do this. Typically, when we talk about processing the transient, body, and tail independently, the first thing you might try and do is split the original sound into those different components. I've been guilty of this in the past. So I want to talk about why that's a bad idea before we get into the solution. So I have my initial kick here, and I've split it into the transient, the body, and the tail. So if we listen to what that sounds like, you can hear it right here. And on each one of these, on the transient, for example, I've added the same processing that I have done on the original kick. So I've got some saturation here. On the body, I've got some amp. And then on the tail, a little bit of reverb. So this is what that sounds like together. Sounds okay, but it's a little bit weird, and you might not be sure why it's a bit weird until you process this and bounce it out. So I've bounced out the kick right here, and what you'll notice as we get into the waveform is on each one of those kind of transitions between the different sections of the kick, the waveform gets real funky. So have a look at this. You've got a really strange bit of phasing going on between the transient and the body here. And it makes kind of a very subtle, weird sound that is kind of hard to describe. It's happening too at the tail, although it's a little bit easier to kind of deal with that because it's not as intense. So if we play that again, it's hard to tell, but it's not as strong as it could be. So what you might look to do is for each one of those sections, you might be inclined to essentially take a little fader and fade out and in each one of these sections. And that'll end up sounding like this, which is somehow even weirder. And then when you bounce that out, it becomes even more obvious why that's weird. You see the transient into the body here is kind of swooping in this really strange way that is losing so much momentum and so much punch. So we're not going to do that. We're not going to do that. What we're going to do instead is work with our kick, and we're going to process this using automation. So again, this is what this guy sounds like with no processing at all. And we're going to use the same things that we had on our processed version here. So to begin with, we're going to add a saturator. And with the automation, we're going to process it so that the dry wet value of our saturator, so drive all the way up, output all the way up, the dry wet value is going to trigger only on the transient here. So I'm going to set some points here so that we start at 100%. And then after these first few cycles, I'm just going to drop it off, maybe back down to about 20-ish%, and then all the way down to 0. And that gives us this sound. So before and after. It just gives a lot more punch to the transient. And you can really fine tune this. You can come in, move this around. However you want to do it, you can make it even longer. But this sound I found about there to be great. One other way that you can dial in this automation to make it a little bit easier to visualize, because sometimes on this timeline view it can be a bit hard, especially when you've got a bunch of other tracks. One other way you can do this, I'm going to delete that, is via a clip envelope. So if you select the clip itself and open it up, so we get this view, if you enable warp mode, you'll see an envelopes section over here. So if you click on envelopes, you can then dial in at the clip level this automation. Down the bottom, you'll see the list of devices that are on this track and the different parameters that can be automated. So I'm going to do the dry wet value. Now, the one thing to note about using the envelope here is that the percentage change is different to the automation curve up here. The automation up here is going to be between 0 and 100, whereas the automation here is between 0 and plus 50% and minus 50%. That means it is dependent on the position of the dry wet value. So for example, if I set this to 50% and then move my curve up to plus 50%, then the dry wet value is going to push plus 50% from the position it's in. So as I play this, you'll see it will be full. Likewise, if I move this all the way back down and put it at minus 50%, it will basically be 0. So that's important to note because the position of this really matters. If I move that to 100%, there'll be some saturation. And if you're thinking it's going between 0 and 100, that can be confusing. So for this parameter, I'm going to start it at plus 50% and then just make sure that the dry wet value is set to 50% here. And then the same way as before, I'm going to come in, move this down around here, and then kind of drop it off maybe around there. For processing kicks, I actually massively prefer the clip envelope view because you can really see all of the waveform very clearly. It's easier to work with, in my opinion, than the automation view here. But each their own. I wanted to make sure that you had the ability to kind of see the different ways of applying the automations. So for the body, I'm going to grab the next one that we have here, which is the amp. Again, I'm going to delete the automation, and we've just got some really heavy amp stuff going on here. If I apply some dry wet, you'll see what that sounds like for the whole sound. So what I want to do here, I'm going to do this automation lane again. After me saying that I love the clip envelope, we're going to go in here. I'm going to apply it only to the body. So I'm going to skip some of this transient, and then just in the body area around here, I'm going to apply, I don't know, 30% or so. We'll adjust it. Cool, I think that sounds good. And then finally, for the tail, I'm going to use the hybrid reverb. And again, remove the current automation. And then just on the tail. So I'm going to do this, and then this. And then I might bring this back a little bit so it's like that. Let's see how that sounds. So I actually think that sounds pretty good when it's affecting the body as well as the tail. So we now have our 3 devices, our saturator, our amp, and then our hybrid reverb, and they are completely changing the sound of this kick drum. So just as a reminder, this is it before, and this is it after. And finally, I want to show you what this looks like when we bounce it out. Have a look at this waveform. You can see that the phase is really nicely aligned. We haven't got any of those weird kind of jittery bits that we had before. We haven't got any strange smoothing issues. Everything is exactly as it was before. It's just to have a little bit more character assigned to it. So it's very, very great way of adding character to the sounds by really dialing in on the transient, the body, and the tail. And it really gives you this ability to keep the phase in line too.